Number 10. Terror in Canada. Amélie Sakalis was a Belgian tourist living her best life. In the summer of 2018, she traveled to Canada to see the amazing wildlife and beautiful, untouched landscapes. And one of the best ways to do this is by hitching a ride from one point to the next. Everything was going great for the 28-year-old woman until she got into Sean Mackenzie's vehicle. On August 22nd, as Amélie was trying to get a ride to the lower mainland, she was picked up by Sean. It happened somewhere near Penticton on Highway 1, the singular highway that runs all through Canada. She was discovered shortly after, the victim of murder. Police were able to link a white van found at the crime scene to the killer, and he was promptly arrested. The next year, he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. There was no real motive for the killing other than Sean was lonely and disturbed. He had a beautiful foreign woman in his vehicle, and some evil and horrible beast in his mind was let loose. Number 9. A deal gone wrong. A hitchhiker in Kentucky got into a really weird situation in 2019. According to the Clay County Sheriff's Office, Michael Paul Collins was on the side of the road with his thumb out when a man named Ronnie Helton picked him up. Everything seemed fairly ordinary at first. They were driving along and making light conversation, and that was when Ronnie made things really weird. He offered the hitchhiker a fat stack of cash if he would perform some rather inappropriate acts upon him in his vehicle. Here's where the strangeness really kicks off. Michael said okay and agreed to the deal. They stopped, and Michael told Ronnie to get out of his vehicle and take his clothes off. He agreed, got out of the car, and then Michael jumped into the driver's seat and drove away. It's difficult to say what happened here. The hitchhiker probably hadn't been expecting to be propositioned by a strange man in Kentucky, and it could very well be that he was absolutely terrified and did the only thing he could think of to get out of the situation, even if it was stealing the man's car. He took his Chevrolet Malibu, met a different older man at a dollar store in another town, under the pretense of trading vehicles, and then got into his Mercury Cougar and sped away. At this point, he was just trying to get away with stealing the first car. In the end, the police tracked Michael down to the home he was hiding in and arrested him for theft. Ronnie Helton was also arrested for solicitation and thrown in jail. Number 8. The Girl in the Box. Colleen Stan's decision to go hitchhiking led to the worst 7 years any person has ever experienced. She was dubbed the Girl in the Box by the media, but that hardly even scratches the surface of her excruciating captivity. Colleen was 20 years old in 1977 when she left her hometown of Eugene, Oregon. She considered herself a pro hitchhiker and had already turned down 2 rides before she got in a blue van, driven by a man who seemed completely harmless. His wife was in the passenger seat, and there was a baby in the back. But this happy family was the worst thing that could have happened to Colleen. The man was Cameron Hooker, his wife Janice. They had been actively looking for somebody to kidnap. You see, Cameron had some really disgusting bondage fantasies, and up until Colleen came along, he had needed to use his wife to fulfill the fantasies. His wife was on board with the kidnapping just to get herself off the hook. But what followed was one of the most disturbing kidnappings in history. Colleen was kept in a coffin underneath the couple's bed for about 23 hours a day. For the 1 or 2 hours she was let out of the box, it was only to be tortured. This went on for years, until slowly she was given more freedom. She started being allowed to work in the garden, to go for jogs, and even to visit her family. But she was brainwashed by the disturbed couple and feared that if she escaped, a dangerous cult would murder her family. The only good thing was that at least she didn't have to stay in the box for such painfully long periods. After 7 years, Cameron wanted to marry Colleen as his second wife. This was what ultimately caused his first wife Janice to help Colleen escape and turn her husband over to the police. Cameron was given 104 years in prison. Colleen received extensive therapy, went on to get married, and now works with an organization helping abused women. She even got herself a degree in accounting. Janice changed her name and is currently living somewhere in California. Number 7. Jeffrey Dahmer. If you haven't heard the name Jeffrey Dahmer before, you're one of the lucky ones. This notorious serial killer was arrested back in 1991 after committing some of the most disturbing crimes in serial killer history. He murdered 17 men and boys over a span of 13 years before he was finally captured. He was described as soft-spoken, handsome, and polite, but in the back of his head, he was a vicious beast. as this vicious beast had an affinity for picking up helpless hitchhikers, eating their flesh, and pickling their body parts in glass jars. We can't get into the details about all 17 of his victims, but we can talk about the first one. According to what Jeffrey Dahmer told Inside Edition in 1993, the first killing was never planned. He was on his way back from shopping in 1978 when he came across a hitchhiker. Dahmer had already had fantasies about picking up a hitchhiker and bringing him back to his house, and there was his fantasy come to life on the side of the road. His name was Stephen Hicks, a young man of only 18 years. Jeffrey Dahmer took him back to his parents' house in Ohio. Once inside the privacy of the house, Dahmer strangled him, beat him with a barbell. He then dismembered the body and put the pieces in garbage bags. Oddly enough, and what a lot of people don't know, is that Dahmer didn't kill again until 1987. In the time between his first and second murder, he joined the army and went to Germany. He was discharged because of alcoholism, and although he spent all those years without a victim, he said the taste from the first one was always there on the tip of his tongue. The hunger never left him. Number 6. Good deed gone wrong. The Oklahoma Police Department arrested a man named Lee King. It was following a brutal shooting that happened along the I-40 back in July of 2021. All because two good citizens decided to pick up a hitchhiker out of the goodness of their hearts. The cops say John Riggs and Jake Myers picked up Lee King after he had run out of gas on the highway. This was near Vian in Oklahoma. They helped the stranger to get some gas, and as they were driving the hitchhiker back to his vehicle, Lee King pulled out a gun and shot both men for no reason. They had stopped to help, to give King a ride, when they had no reason to, and he rewarded them with bullets. The two good citizens were transported to hospitals in Arkansas, where they were last listed in critical condition. King then stole his vehicle, crashed it in the city of Antlers, and escaped on foot. Cops had to launch a manhunt to find this guy and ultimately tracked him down to Sequoia County, where he was hiding at a relative's house. He was arrested and booked on 2 charges of shooting with intent to kill. 5. The Unknown Boy. 6 decades ago in 1961, a teenage hitchhiker was killed in a crash. He became known as the Unknown Boy, his identity lost seemingly forever. He had blue eyes, olive skin, and was no older than 15. Sadly, he drowned when the car that had picked him up drove off a bridge and plunged into the Cahaba River in Alabama. The driver survived, but had very few details about the strange boy he was giving a ride. The young man had a pack of cigarettes on him, a watch, and the miraculous medal of the Immaculate Conception about his neck with cotton twine. He was likely on his way to California, but this was really all anyone knew about him. Local police tried to learn his identity to no avail. Weeks went by, and a quiet funeral was held for him locally. Town leaders came to pay their respects, but nobody could ever find his parents. On his tombstone was written, "Unknown in life, but recognized in death." Now, over 60 years later, the mystery has been solved. DNA technology and genealogy has identified the unknown hitchhiker as Daniel Paul Armentrout. This was confirmed in an interview done with his surviving brother, Don Hamilton. According to what Don said, 77 years old now, they had grown up in an abusive household together. The eldest brother ran away, then so did Danny, and finally Don joined the army at 17 and never looked back. Don retired as a sergeant major in 1989, was married to his wife for over 40 years, and wound up with 8 grandchildren. But throughout his whole life, not a single day passed that he didn't wonder what had become of his 2 brothers, especially young Danny. Number 4. Deadly I-85 shooting. On the morning of Christmas Eve 2014, a young hitchhiker with a handgun and a homemade silencer stuck his thumb out and got a ride. A couple saw him on the side of the road in Greenville County and stopped to pick him up. Shortly after, Josh Asher Farrell Villarreal shot them both in the head and left them for dead on the side of Interstate 85. He then took their 2013 Hyundai and made a break for it. He stopped to meet a friend in Georgia, only to be pulled over by a state trooper for speeding. Amazingly, the trooper let him go, and so Josh drove back to Greenville, stashed the stolen car at an abandoned property, and went back about his business. The police eventually tracked the psychotic young man down and charged him with murder, but could never squeeze a motive out of him. He didn't know the couple, he had no reason to shoot them, and he had no previous criminal record. It was nothing but a random act of violence. Number 3. Big Island Hitchhiker. Police on the Big Island of Hawaii recently arrested a 33-year-old hitchhiker named Lawrence Kakoa Botello. In October of 2021, Lawrence was standing on the side of the road in Hawaiian Paradise Park. He had his thumb out, looking for a ride to anywhere. After he's picked up by a man who prefers to keep his identity out of it, things got really weird. First, the two men visited a fast food joint. As they were in line at the drive-thru, Lawrence started acting erratic, and that was when the driver saw he was armed with a pistol and several knives. The hitchhiker appeared to have a mental explosion, threatened to kill the driver, and went totally berserk. The driver was so scared that he got out of his own vehicle and let Lawrence drive away with it. But he wasn't getting far on the Big Island. The police tracked him down and charged him with robbery, theft, and kidnapping. We still don't know what in the world was wrong with the guy, or what he was doing hitchhiking in the first place. Number 2. Billy Cook. Billy Cook went on a killing spree in 1950. People don't really talk about this guy today, but he was big news 70 years ago, and one of the very first cold-blooded American serial killers. Billy was a native of Missouri. He had a deformed eye, a nasty temper, and honestly a pretty miserable life. After a stint in the Missouri State Penitentiary, Billy started killing. He drifted to California, down to Texas, and kidnapped an auto mechanic. Billy was hitchhiking, and the mechanic pulled over to give him a ride. Instead, Billy forced him into the trunk. Luckily for this first victim, he managed to fight his way out of the trunk and get away. But shortly after, Billy was back on the side of the road hitchhiking. He was picked up in Oklahoma by the Mosser family: Carl, Thelma, Ronald, Gary, and Pamela Sue. Carl and Thelma were a young couple, and the other three were their very small children. Billy forced the family to drive him to the town of Joplin in Missouri. Once there, he shot all of them, even their dog, and dumped their corpses down a well. Billy went on like this for quite some time, zigzagging across the country and forcing people to drive him places. He was finally captured after forcing a pair of hunters to drive him to Mexico. This was after he shot to death a salesman named Robert Dewey from Seattle. Billy thought he could hide out in a small Mexican town called Santa Rosalie, but the Mexican authorities had been warned about him. He was captured by the local police chief, shipped back to the US, and sentenced to death. He was executed in the gas chamber of San Quentin on December 12, 1952. Number 1. The Hitchhiking Robot in Philadelphia. If you've ever wondered just how truly dangerous the United States is compared to other countries, we need to take a look at a very special hitchhiking robot. The robot's name was Hitchbot, and it was left on the side of the highway in Salem, Massachusetts on July 17, 2015. The creators, a pair of Canadian professors named David Harris Smith and Frank Zeller, had already completed the experiment in Canada, Germany, and the Netherlands. In each case, the hitchhiking robot had made it clear from one side of the country to the other, but it didn't make it very far in the US. The robot wore yellow boots, had blue limbs, and had a sign that read, "San Francisco or bust." Things started out okay at first. Over 2 weeks, Hitchbot was picked up by strangers and taken from Massachusetts to New York. It stopped for a photo shoot in Times Square, and then was on to Philadelphia. And tragically, for the good citizens of Philly, that was where the robot's journey ended. On a Saturday, a group of thugs cornered the robot, beat it senseless, and ripped its limbs off. And then, the robot was gone. Its journey cut violently short before it even left the East Coast. Thanks for watching. Would you rather pick up a deranged hitchhiker or be the hitchhiker being picked up by a lunatic? Let us know which sounds worse in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you next time. Bye!